This episode is sponsored by Greenvits.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the DRH Show. As usual, I talk to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by a health psychologist. She carries out research in self-management of long-term conditions, creativity, and well-being. Dr. Stephanie Kilinc, or Kilinc, thanks for joining me.
Hello.
Sorry if I mispronounced your name. It's Kilinc. Yeah.
It is, yes, Kilinc.
Yeah, I suppose you could tell us your trajectory in life, tell us your background, and also what's the reason behind that interesting surname, and also talk to us how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the surname because it's different to everything else. So yes, I'm married to a Turkish man, so that's where the surname comes from. It causes no end of problems in pronunciation. So yes, I started my career in psychology way back in 2001, 2002, when I completed my undergraduate degree and started my master's degree in health psychology at Teesside University. And then straight after that, I was lucky enough to get a lectureship at Teesside University. I've stayed there ever since. I trained there as a health psychologist and did my PhD there as well. And it was when I was doing my MSc that I started to get an interest in epilepsy in particular. So I had a little look around and found that there wasn't a great deal of psychological research looking at epilepsy. It was very much medically based, looking for drug treatments, side effects of drug treatments and those sorts of things. And not a lot of people back then, it's got better now, but back then not a lot of people were looking at what it was like to live with epilepsy and how we could support people to live with epilepsy. So I started looking at that when I did my master's degree and carried that on into my PhD and looked specifically at people with adult onset epilepsy. So there's a misconception that you develop epilepsy as a child, but actually a large number of people develop it as adults. It can happen at any point in their life. It happened to me tomorrow, and a lot of the time we don't even know why they develop epilepsy.
I'm not even aware that you could have epilepsy at a later stage in life.
Yes, and it can happen, we don't even know the reason. Mm-hmm. And that got me thinking. I thought, what would it be like if that happened to somebody and no one could even explain why it had happened? So that was the basis of my PhD. So I interviewed people who developed epilepsy in adulthood, and they ranged from developing it just over age of 18 right up to 60 years old. And things around sort of periods without having seizures, we would assume would be good. Mm-hmm. But actually they were really stressful for some people because they were just waiting for the next seizure to occur. So there was a lot of interesting things came out of that. And as part of that work, I was introduced to the Neurological Alliance, which is a charity organisation that works with people with all types of neurological conditions, including epilepsy. And I became a trustee with them back in 2005, 2006, and I still work with them today. I'm still a trustee today. And it was that work that started to, my research started to branch out into the experience of neurological conditions in general, because what we found was that people with different types of neurological condition have those similar sorts of experiences. They're diagnosed later in life, some of them, and there's different types of neurological conditions. Some get progressively worse, some like epilepsy are more episodic and fluctuate. And again, from a psychological perspective, we don't tend to look at it that much. We don't tend to look at what is it like to live with these conditions. Mm-hmm. So that's really where I've come from. I'd love to go back to the epilepsy research. That's definitely where I will go back one day. But for now, I've started to branch out a little further. So a colleague of mine looks at psychosocial adjustment to long-term conditions in general, and neurological conditions are a form of long-term condition. So now I'm looking at long-term conditions more broadly as well, and self-management support and adjustment. With my colleague, I look at adjustment.
Actually, that's the reason why.
And I suppose what underpins. I suppose what underpins everything that I do is a qualitative approach. So I am a qualitative researcher, and everything that I do is about lived experience and finding out from the person themselves, what is it like for you to live through whatever it is, and to live with this particular condition.
And actually, as I was about to say, that's actually the reason why I invited you on the DRH show. You've just talked to us about your background, your research in epilepsy, but for those who are familiar with your work, you've actually been running a self-management program. And of course, just like what you've said, your main aim is to support people with long-term conditions to help them improve managing their health. So if you could just talk to us, Dr. Kilinc, what's this online self-management program about?
Yes, so for the last 3 weeks, we've been running an online self-management program to help people cope with lockdown. People with long-term conditions may find it particularly difficult at the moment during lockdown, and we're all feeling the stress of it, and living with a long-term condition can be stressful already. You know, they might have medical appointments that they maybe can't go to, or they may be shielding themselves. You know, it can be a really difficult time for them at the moment, and just generally not being able to meet people. Their support mechanisms have changed. So what we thought we'd do is we'd run some very simple creative sessions online, and each week we looked at a slightly different element of lockdown, but in every week we did some really simple creative activities. And the idea was that doing those creative activities would get us to reflect and think about how we are coping with lockdown, and as a group we can share what each other are trying to do and learn from each other. And you've also got that social connection as well, and some social interaction with people. So there were live sessions, and the first week we looked at what is important to us. So it was very simple. Drew round your hand, and on each finger you wrote something that was important to you, and we thought about, were we able to maintain those things during lockdown, and if we weren't, what might we be able to do instead? And then, you know, we could decorate it and colour it in, do all sorts of different things like that if you wanted to as well. And then the second session was around goal setting, because it's quite well publicised that having a plan for your day can help you get through each day at the moment. So we thought about, just for that particular day, that day or the next day, what sort of things would we try to achieve, and how would we get there, and how would we pace ourselves to get there as well, and make sure that we didn't try to do too much. And we did that as a vision board. So you could use magazine clippings and photographs, or you could draw, you could write words and phrases about the goals that you were aiming to achieve. And then the last one was, how do we maintain our social connections at the moment? And we thought about different ways that we can connect, different online platforms that we can use, and how difficult it can be to open up and say, actually, I'm struggling at the moment and I need whatever. And that can be really difficult sometimes for people to say. So we talked about how we might do that. And what we ultimately made was a solar system. So we had different planets, and in each planet we wrote the qualities of the support that we receive, so the things that we value in the support that we receive. And I also had a small group of people who I've worked with throughout all my projects, people with long-term conditions, and they came on board and they helped get the conversation going. So yeah, it seemed to work really well. and we're looking at maybe running some more at a later date.
Yeah, this is really a fantastic tool, and obviously, from my understanding, is you've been very busy trying to, introduce it to people during the lockdown, because obviously, this is really a challenging time, and they would need a lot of help in terms of, the mental health and well-being. But from my understanding is that this is actually you've been working on this tool for quite some time. So can you tell us the process and how you developed this prior to the lockdown?
Yes, so it's based on a tool called My Life Tool. And we started developing that, it'll be almost a year ago, year in June, that we started developing that. And we're still working on it at the moment, although the tool is available, there's still a lot more that we want to do with it. And the tool is paper-based at the moment, and it's 7 different booklets, an introductory booklet, a scrapbooking booklet, and 5 toolkit booklets. And those toolkits are filled with different exercises or tools that you can use to help work through how to self-manage a long-term condition. And the tool was developed based on some research that we did back in 2017, was when we conducted the research. We've just had it published. And we developed a self-management framework for neurological conditions. And now we've broadened the tool to look at long-term conditions more broadly. So the framework has meaning and purpose at its core. So it's the idea that to find and maintain meaning and purpose is central to self-managing a long-term condition. And to find or maintain meaning and purpose in life, there are 5 different things that interact to influence that. So the first one is identity. So thinking about who we are. Who am I now that I have a long-term condition? How have I changed? What do I expect from myself now? So a lot of people still try and do the same things that they used to do before their condition developed, and then they find that they can't. And that can be quite challenging to reconcile with that and to work through, well, who am I now and what can I do now and what can I expect from myself? Then there's how we are aware of our bodies. So there's a lot of work on planning and pacing, and it's a real central feature of a lot of self-management approaches. So learning to plan your day, to pace, to conserve your energy, and make sure that you don't do too much in a given day. Another element is about taking charge, and this is something that came through from my epilepsy research as well. When people are diagnosed with a long-term condition, they're often told, well, now you can't do this and you can't do that. And there's so much information out there on the internet that they read, and it can be a minefield and just so much information to take on board. And what can be really helpful is just to take some time and learn about your own particular experience of the condition. What can I do? So someone saying I can't, perhaps, I should be careful when I'm exercising, perhaps. But I might be quite a fit person anyway, and I can learn that I can do some exercise, but I've just got to be cautious about it. So it's not about going against medical advice, but it's about sort of finding your own boundaries and learning what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And in doing that, you can regain some control back over life and over the condition as well. There's also elements of resilience in there too. Mm-hmm. And the 4th element is about social connections. So it's about receiving support, but it's also about giving support to others. So it's not just about receiving it, it's about giving support as well. And a shared understanding is really central to this. Being amongst people who live with long-term conditions themselves, who implicitly understand what it's like for you, so you don't have to explain yourself all of the time when you come into that particular group of people. And then the last one was finding what is important to me. It's almost like the final step. Although it's not a staged framework, it can take people a while to work out what is important to me, and to put yourself first, and to recognise your own needs, and to find time for yourself, and to find what does give you meaning and purpose in life. And that might be a process of trial and error. For some people that we worked with, it was about challenging themselves. And that could be in various different ways. It could be by creating something particularly difficult and challenging and saying, well, can I actually do that? For others, it can be about spending time with family and friends, and putting effort into those relationships. Mm-hmm. For others, it's simply having a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So it really varies, and it's about each person working out what it is for them that gives them meaning and purpose at that point in time. So they're the 5 elements, and if someone's struggling in a particular area, it can affect them maintaining meaning and purpose, and ultimately affect how they manage and deal with their long-term condition. Mm-hmm. So we took that and developed that into My Life tool. So the tool mirrors the framework. So the different booklets are based around those different 5 elements. Mm-hmm. And it came about completely randomly, because again, we used a qualitative method to collect the original data, and we took the framework back to the participants and said, look, this is what we've got, what do you think? And one lady looked at it as a diagram, and she said, do you know what, I could take that to my doctors and say, look, I'm really struggling with identity at the minute. I would like to focus on that today. Mm. And that's what really got us thinking that there's something in this. So we've also built a little life wheel into the introductory booklet that's split into the 5 elements. And we just recommend that people regularly come back to that and mark how comfortable they are in each of those 5 areas of their lives. And if you can see that you're not so comfortable in one area, then that might be the booklet that you work on for that particular time. So it's not prescriptive. You don't start at book 1 and work through to the end. And you don't have to use all of the tools. It's a collection of tools, and you can dip in and out of it as and when you want to, and as and when you need to.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. When you were giving me a rundown to the elements involved in your tool, I actually have the sense that it's sort of linked to positive psychology, and I find that quite interesting. I know there's interdisciplinarity, when you work with different fields in psychology, but is there a reason why you decided to incorporate positive psychology approach with developing the tool?
Yeah, you're right. It is underpinned by positive psychology, and a lot of the tools come from that discipline. And it really came from the notion of finding meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm. That's a concept that sits within positive psychology. It's linked with personal growth and flourishing and finding meaning in life. So that's where we started. It was a participant that said herself, you need to find meaning and purpose in life. And we took that and we started looking around, and that's when we started looking at the positive psychology literature and realised that there's a lot there. It has a lot to offer in terms of developing the tool, and it is used in other self-management programs as well, quite successfully. So the ethos of the tool, the way it's written, is all around looking to the positive, so looking at your strengths. So a good example is that we ask, in one of the tools, we ask people to think about a challenging time that they've had in the past, and then think about how they overcame that challenge and what strengths they drew on to overcome that challenge. And then we get them to think about, so how can we apply those strengths and what we've learned to the challenges facing us now? Mm-hmm. So it was something that was commented upon in the pilot study for the tool as well. Someone actually said it's a much kinder way of self-management, rather than looking at the negatives and trying to change a negative attitude. It's about focusing on the positives and looking at that sort of growth. So it is something that seems to be working.
Mm-hmm. And why did you decide to develop this tool?
So it wasn't the plan. We just originally set out to find out what is it like to self-manage a neurological condition. What is that experience? Because again, no one had really focused in on that particularly. And it was, as I say, the participants themselves were saying, you know, you could develop a tool from what you found here. The framework could become a tool. The way we collected data was a scrapbook. So we asked people to keep a scrapbook for a month and put in whatever they wanted that represented their experience of self-management. And people thought that could be the tool as well. That process of reflecting in the scrapbook really helped them. So that's why part of the tool is a scrapbook, to help people to reflect with that. So it was something that came out of the original research, was suggested to us by people with neurological conditions. And what we wanted to do right from the beginning was to show that you don't have to look at individual conditions, you can look across conditions. Mm-hmm. And we found that the experience of self-management, there was similarities. We drew the framework out of similarities across various neurological conditions. And it was in the middle of developing the tool, one of the team said, well, why can't we use this for any long-term condition? You know, why are we just focusing on neurological? And no one could answer the question. So we thought, right, we'll test it with people with any long-term condition. So we piloted it with people with diabetes and asthma and pain, and they thought it was great. So that's when it broadened out. So yeah, it's something that's evolved through the process really, and listening to the people themselves and what they needed.
I personally like the scrapbook element, and I think it's something that would really benefit me. And from my understanding is that this tool that you've developed is mainly paper-based, and right now, of course, for obvious reason, you're doing it online. But do you have any plans of, you know, converting it to a face-to-face approach?
Yes. So we started a face-to-face program in January of this year. It was a 12-week program. So we took the scrapbooking idea, and we were also really conscious of the social connections element. That's really difficult on paper to work through that. So we wanted an opportunity to get people in a group together. So in January we started a 12-week program. It was very small scale feasibility study really, just to see how it worked and to develop it out. And there was a session every fortnight, and each week we focused on a different booklet, and with each booklet there was a different creative activity. So when we looked at identity, people completed their own coat of arms or a shield that represented them. When we looked at planning and pacing, there's a diagram, like a gingerbread person diagram, where you can mark on where your symptoms occur, how you feel and how you're experiencing them, and what you do to manage them. And that's got us start a conversation around pacing and planning. We use the vision board around goal setting for the taking charge. Social connections, we use the planet, so that's where we got the idea for the online sessions at the moment. And the final week, unfortunately, we couldn't quite finish because we got locked down, so we weren't able to finish the programme. But the final week, we were going to sort of pull everything together and reassess, so what is important to us. And we found that people liked a little bit of guidance around what to create, but not too much, because some liked the freedom just to do whatever they wanted, and that was fine. You could just come into the sessions and create anything really that you wanted to work on that day, but some people needed a little bit more guidance, which was fine, a bit more prompting. And again, it just got those conversations going. There were 2-hour sessions with a break in the middle. We could have gone on longer, to be honest, once we got going with them. And we had peer mentors in the sessions as well. So people who lived with long-term conditions who were trained in peer mentoring, and they helped to get that conversation going. They might work one-on-one with somebody if they were a little bit nervous about joining in with the group to begin with. And the other thing that we found really useful was group projects. So the idea of the solar system, we could have done that individually, but what worked really well was everybody shouting out the qualities and the values that they needed and preferred in the support that they receive, and then we put them on a larger scale diagram of a solar system. So we had something that, to come out with a product at the end of it as well that we could show people. So at the minute we are analysing the data from that, and we're looking to produce a handbook or a guide that practitioners might be able to use and in their own practice if they wanted to set up similar sorts of groups themselves.
It's really remarkable how you have engaged the people with long-term conditions, the service users, and your process actually reminds me of one of the interviews that I've done a few weeks ago with Dame Tilwikes, and she actually talked about the importance of engaging people, service users throughout the process of your research. So if you could just highlight to us the importance of involving people with long-term conditions, the service users, in producing such a tool.
Yeah, it's central to what we do, and it's also central to what the Neurological Alliance do, the charity that I work with. They've always believed in having people with the conditions at the heart of all of their work. And I suppose with me taking a lived experience approach, I personally, I think there's nothing better than just going to the person themselves and asking them, what does this mean to you? How do you feel about this? What do you do in that particular situation? So it's been embedded in the project right from the beginning in terms of lived experience. But then when we started developing the tool itself, we set up a steering group of people with long-term conditions. So there was 10 people that we got together, and we had 3 development meetings with them, and they really designed the tool. All I did was, and I was working with some colleagues from the psychology department as well, and we came in the first week and said, look, this is the framework that we developed from earlier research. We want to make that into a tool. What do you think? And we got loads of information back. So we took that away. We came back the next week with some ideas of possible tools that we could incorporate in. And some they just threw out straight away that, no, you don't want that. That's not going to work at all. So we got rid of it. And others, they came up, we developed new tools being in the room with them. So it was very much driven by the people who would use the tool themselves. And they even came up with the name. We had a bit of we went round the group and everyone had to pitch their idea for a name. And then we voted on My Life Tool at the end. So they were central to the development of the tool. And it was really good for them. It gave them a chance to meet new people. Working with people that way, involving them in your research and in your work, it can help develop their confidence and their skills base. And there's a lot of evidence around co-production and participatory approaches in research, and it's people are using it much more now. We talk about patient and public involvement, and it's something that we have to think about now when we write funding bids. But how much do we really incorporate it? Do we just tag it on the end, or we'll check our findings with people at the end, or do we really embed it right through from the beginning? And that's what we did with the face-to-face programme. So we got the peer mentors are participatory research assistants. They will be co-authors on the paper at the end as well. They're analysing the data with us now, so they've gone through different training programmes that we developed to be able to do that. And they came up with ideas for what we could do during the sessions. So it has really been driven by them all the way through. It wouldn't have happened without them. And it's certainly something that we want to pursue moving forward.
So if we want to use this tool, the name is My Life Tool. Is it available online for download, to be downloaded by everyone?
Yes, it's available at www.mylifetool.co.uk, and it's there as a PDF version. So the 7 booklets are PDF versions at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'll put that on the video description box. So for anyone who's interested to, have a go at this tool, they can download it. But my understanding is that this is mainly for people with long-term conditions.
Yes. Although we have some people who have used it with who have anxiety, and they've found it quite helpful for them as well. We haven't tested it with that group yet, but that's something we would like to look at in the future.
I'd love to hear about the result of that work. Now, I'll be trying to learn more about you in a more personal level. So you've talked to us your line of work in relation to health psychology and also a bit of positive psychology. So Dr. Kilinc, what's the most important thing that you want the public to know more about your work?
I suppose it is it's that how I work with the people themselves. It's about giving people a voice, to me, a voice that sometimes would never be heard. And I think that's something that drives me and drives my research forward. It's a feature in everything that I've done so far. These are people who aren't always asked about their experiences, particularly when I spoke to some people living with epilepsy. No one had asked them, what's it like to live with epilepsy? No one had sat down with them for an hour and listened to their story. And that's really humbling when people tell you that. And it's so important that we give these people a voice and a space to be heard.
That's a really lovely message. Actually, you remind me of, I can't remember her name on top of my head, but there was a fashion designer, and she's into designing gown which is more personal, because when we wear gowns, it's just like one of those medical dressing gowns that you have to wear. And she's really passionate about trying to educate people that not because you have a long-term condition, it's really the end of the world, that you don't have to look, fashionable, for lack of a better word. But I think it also resonates with the kind of work that you're doing. You're trying to give voice to the people with long-term conditions, that even though you have long-term conditions, there's still, something positive to look about. You talk about earlier that those 5 elements embedded with your work. And I think that's really a lovely message for people to realize, that you're not just a health psychologist at the end of the day. You're also trying to, uplift people in the best possible way. So what I'm interested to find out now, Dr. Kilinc, is there a particular individual or a particular publication or a particular book which has really a strong influence to your approach to your line of work?
There's various ones. I suppose I started with Jonathan Smith and phenomenological research. That was really where I started. One of his earlier editions of Qualitative Psychology was my Bible for a number of years. And of course, his books around IPA. But I'm really interested in just different ways of collecting data, different ways to help people express their experiences, and different ways to give them a voice. So a colleague of mine years ago, she introduced me to semiotic analysis, so where you analyse images, and more discursive approaches, which I've never tried myself yet, as I'm not trained in it, but sort of narrative approaches, visual methods are really interesting to me, and creative ways of collecting data, and that's where the scrapbooking idea came from, because it's very difficult. You go into an interview and you ask people questions, and it can be really tough, and you can think, oh, I don't know what to say to that question. It can be difficult, whereas letting them have some space to express themselves visually, so whether that be photographs, for example, so that there's photo elicitations quite well used now, particularly in health research, it could be anything really, giving them the chance to have some space to reflect and think, what expresses my experience? And then you can still follow that up with an interview if you feel the need to, and to find out more. But they've got that starting point, so they're not just coming into the interview dry and cold, not really knowing what's coming. So I would say, yeah, anything around visual methods, that's where I'm at the moment.
So mainly your main approach in processing your research, in analyzing your data, is mainly qualitative. I'm just interested. I've been out of the academia. I finished my MSc a long time ago, nearly 10 years. So I'm not aware if right now there's still a debate whether what's the best approach to do research, whether qualitative or quantitative, because I'm quite sure that you would be familiar that there's some voices in the academia that would say that qualitative is not really a robust approach compared to quantitative. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, you come across it sometimes. You do, and I understand that there's a place for both, really. Yeah, I'm trained in both. I haven't used quantitative analysis for a very long time, but I know that where I'm heading now with the tool, it's going to need evaluation that is probably quantitative in its approach. So I can see that coming down the line, and I will do that. It's about doing what fits the research question, really. And at the moment, what I'm doing, we need to explore that lived experience first before I feel personally, we can't start developing these tools and programs until we know what it's really like for the people that live with the conditions. So I always start there, but ultimately, yes, it will require more quantitative analysis in the future. And you do meet researchers and academics who, aren't that comfortable with qualitative approaches, but a lot now, they do recognise that it has its place, and they're different, and they have their merits. And I always tell my students, you're guided by your research question, and you need to be able to do whatever answers that research question. So you can't hide away, from statistics, or you can't hide away from the qualitative if you're not comfortable with it. You need to sort of be comfortable, or know people who are, and get a team together who can do whatever you need to do for that particular research approach.
Brilliant. Obviously, you've been working in this area for quite some time, so I suppose you've encountered a number of misconceptions about self-management, about health psychology. So I suppose this is the chance to address those misconceptions that you've come across with during the course of doing research in this area.
I suppose in terms of self-management, it's people are recognising more and more that it is a process. It's a lifelong process. It's not an outcome, but unfortunately, the way a lot of programs are set up, that they're sort of maybe 6-week courses or online courses, and at the end you come out and yes, you may be better equipped to self-manage your condition, but your condition can change, your circumstances in life can change, and they can all affect how you experience your condition and how you self-manage your condition. So that's sort of where we pitched My Life tool as something that you can always come back to, that's always there. It's not overly prescriptive, it's very open and very reflective in its approach. It doesn't focus on particular symptoms or anything like that. You come to it with your experience, and you put your experience in and reflect upon that, and then see where it takes you. So from the self-management, I would say that that's sort of the message, really, that it is lifelong, it is a process, and it can change. What works one day might not work the next. And how do we support people with that? And then I suppose with my health psychology hat on, I do feel that is a role that health psychologists can have. So it's fine to have these tools, these paper-based tools or online tools, if we ever get to that point. But sometimes face-to-face, having these groups, or just having that one-to-one support that's not coming from as much of a medical perspective, And I think a health psychologist is really well placed to provide that self-management support from a more psychological perspective, helping people to work out what does work for them, how they can be in control of their condition, and ultimately of their journey and of their life. And I always thought that was a position that health psychologists would be really well placed, because we're not talking about therapy in the sense that a counselling psychologist or perhaps a clinical psychologist might offer a therapeutic approach. I do believe that a lot of people with long-term conditions, if we could just work with them sooner from when they are diagnosed, that they might not develop depression, anxiety on the scale that we see now that does require a therapeutic intervention. And there always will be some people who do require that. I'm not saying you could stop that completely, but some people, I do believe that if we could just work with them a little earlier in the process, we could put things in place, much less intensive support that could help them live with their conditions much more effectively.
Mm-hmm. And for those of us who are interested to explore health psychology from a qualitative framework, do you have any suggestions in relation to, what's the best resources if we want to explore health psychology?
There's loads of great stuff around qualitative approaches in health psychology. The journals, Psychology and Health, publishes a lot of qualitative papers and some really in-depth interpretative work. There's a journal, Qualitative Health Research. I go to that a lot. And there's work by, I'm trying to think of some of the research. So Chamberlain uses qualitative methods.
Chamberlain.
Yes, Lucy Yardley uses qualitative methods. Their papers and their books I find so interesting to read. So they're good places to start.
Mm-hmm. I'll put that on the description box as well. So, for those who are interested to follow your footsteps, they can actually learn more about that. I always ask this question to all of my guests. Dr. Kilinc, is there one thing about psychology or mental health that you think we should talk more about because we don't often hear it?
I think it is about asking people how are you feeling, and being open, and so that people feel comfortable to say, well, actually, I'm not feeling great today. I know there's a lot of talk around that at the moment in the media, but it is so important. It's really important to feel comfortable, to be able to say, well, I need this, or I need whatever.
Is that because you think there's a strong, there's a strong stance towards medicalisation? When we're talking about mental health, it's always about the medical aspect, and we're not talking about the human element.
I think it can be. I think as well, it's also a confidence and a feeling sometimes that maybe people don't want to hear it. There's that worry that, if someone says, well, I'm not feeling great, oh, now what do I say? What do I do in response to that? Or that, I think that's the beauty of people with long-term conditions coming together, because they understand. You don't have to come in and say, I have this condition, or I feel like this. They know how you feel. They experience it for themselves, and they understand what you're dealing with on a daily basis. So I think there's a lot to be said about getting people together like that with those shared experiences as well.
When you mentioned something about shared experience, that's really something that I could relate to, because of course, as some people would probably know if they're following this, my YouTube channel and the kind of work that I do, on PsychReg, the website that I run, there's a section there where I publish a number of mental health stories, and these are published by people who have lived experience of mental health conditions. And it was not really an idea. It was not an original idea. It was mainly suggested by the readers who've got mental health conditions. Like, could you give us a platform to share our thoughts? And I think it's very similar to what you're doing, especially what you said that, you know, it's just nice to ask people how they are feeling. And I suppose whether you have mental health conditions or long-term physical conditions, you just want to be acknowledged. You know, you just want people to realize how you're feeling at that situation. I think it's really something that, you know, as a profession within psychology and allied fields, that's something that we really should acknowledge, that we begin to, you know, to let the general public know about how important it is to acknowledge people's feelings and, you know, the situation. And I also asked this question to most of my guests. Aside from psychology, what's your distressing outlet? What other interests do you have aside from psychology?
I'm learning to play the piano.
Is that something you've tried because of the lockdown?
Yes, so I could always play the keyboard, but I know the principles of playing piano. I've just never had time to sit down and really practice. So yes, that's something that I'm trying. I find music quite therapeutic as well. It's very relaxing.
Actually, this lockdown allowed me to discover new interests. When I was at uni, I did some Spanish lessons, but I forgot it. You know, so I think, you know, I've got so much time, so I might as well watch some YouTube videos, and I've been learning a few Spanish lessons, but my Spanish is still rusty. But anyway, yeah, like what you've said, this is a perfect opportunity to discover, you know, talents, to discover new interests. We're already nearing towards the end of this interview, Dr. Kilinc. So if you could tell us what's in the pipeline. Do you have any upcoming webinars? Because I know a lot of academics are especially busy with the webinars and the Zoom meetings. And do you have any upcoming book?
We've just finished the online sessions. There might be some coming up next month, but we're not certain yet. But if there are, they'll be detailed on the website. And I suppose the next step really is we want to develop the My Life tool into a mobile application. That's what we really want to do. We wanted to do that from the beginning, but we didn't have the funding to do that. So yeah, that's the priority at the moment.
And of course, well, where can we learn more about you? Are you on social media?
Yeah, well, I'm not. The tool is on Twitter, so My Life Tool 1. It's on Twitter, or you can find out more about me through the Teesside University research pages.
I'll definitely put that on the link. So for anyone who wants to follow your work, My Life Tool, they can learn more about it. Well, Dr. Kilinc, it's been an insightful conversation with you. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about your work, about your tool. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.